I got him at gunpoint.
They're pulling them out.
911. Advise ready for camp.
Welcome to another episode of War Stories. I'm Tom.
And I'm Chuck.
And we have a really cool guest. And I'll get into a very law enforcement community, the sheepdog community. It doesn't matter what generation or age you are. It's a very small community, and it gets smaller and smaller every time I do this show when we run into a guest that you have a connection with or I have a connection with. Hell, even our meeting, Chuck, was John introduced me to you, and we were recording an episode. I don't know if the audience knows this. We were recording an episode, 2 episodes in one day, and we had a guest leaving, and we had Chuck coming in to record his episode. And as our guest was leaving and Chuck was coming in the front door, they passed each other. And it turns out that our guest that was on his way out, Walter, had been Chuck's sergeant at his agency previously.
Yeah,
and they just were randomly scheduled for the same day. And I had known Walter since I was in high school. So,
oh my God,
who do we have today,
for
Chuck?
a decade, yeah. Huh? Oh, we have I'm sorry, the connection's poor on my end, I think. We have Gary here, Gary Edgington. He's a retired California DOJ, the Department of Justice Task Force Commander out of Los Angeles. He started as an explorer and later a cadet with Culver City PD in 1974. He was then hired on with Manhattan Beach PD in 1979. He was in the 3rd week of the LASD, Los Angeles Sheriff's Department Academy, class 197. When we'll get into it on the show.
That's kind of what his story involves.
But his dad, who was an officer with the Los Angeles County Harbor Patrol, was attacked. And then he continued with his training and graduated with his class, ended up at the California Department of Justice and worked counterterrorism from 1999 to 2008. He commanded a task force in LA from 2001 to 2008. Finished his career in 2008 and went to Iraq as an embedded advisor with the Army.
Now, welcome. And I want to say, is it Edgington or Edgington?
Yeah, Edgington. Yes, it is.
Okay,
Edgington.
got it. Okay.
I misspoke.
That's okay, man. That's
Edgington.
Cool. That's
no,
cool.
I wasn't sure because I heard
Edgington.
you say it one way, and so I wasn't sure which way.
No worries, man.
But welcome to the show. We appreciate you.
Very pleased to be here.
And for those of you that don't know, as we're getting ready to record, Gary jumps on this meeting call and says, "Hey, I looked at your website, and that's a DOJ badge you're wearing on your pet." And it isn't. I was in fact attached to a DOJ task force, and the outgoing task force commander that was commanding that task force, it was a friend of yours. Is that correct, Gary?
Yes, that's correct. Wow. Worked together at LA Bureau of Narcotics Enforcement and the LA Field Office for DOJ.
LA B&E, man. In fact, I could probably throw out some names, and you would probably, because B&E in DOJ is very small. I worked with Rodney John.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And I worked with Javier Solis.
Mm-hmm.
He was out of Chula Vista PD, and then he went from Chula Vista to B&E. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so I worked with a bunch of guys from B&E, and you were part of DOJ, but you were not B&E. You were.
No, I was actually.
Oh, B&E. Okay.
I hired on with B&E, and then I moved over to the Bureau of Investigation after a couple of years in B&E.
Okay, so you started at B&E and then went to B of I or whatever.
That's correct.
Okay, and then is that you? Were you like, because LA Impact is a separate office from LA B&E, right?
Actually, it was upstairs in the same area. Impact,
but it was a separate team. Is that how it worked? Because I know LA B&E was separate, and LA Impact was more of the task force. But you guys did share the same building.
Yes, LA Impact had their own workspace, but there were lab crews. There were 2 lab teams. There were 2 surveillance teams. There was a diversion crew, which was pharmaceuticals, and then there was a buy bus crew and a violent offenders crew.
LA Impact was a cool team. Now, did you know Mike Kennedy? He was CNOA region president for our region, and he's Tim Kennedy's dad.
Okay.
the MMA fighter.
Oh yeah.
He was
Oh,
on our
really?
task force. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So I
Okay.
worked with Tim. Tim Kennedy actually grew up in my city, and I worked with Mike Kennedy, his dad, on the task force. We worked some narcotics cases. Mike was a narc guy from way back, and he knew all the B&E guys, and he'd been working dope for 20 plus years. So
Tim Kennedy, this amazing guy. That dude is like, wow, man. Man,
his dad was a really good narc and a really better dude. I've been to his house for Christmas parties, and mom's a
Did you
great
see Tim?
lady. And what?
Did you
Tim
meet
lived in our
Tim?
city. Yeah, when he was a kid.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
I remember
how was
when
that?
Mike came into the task force one time and was like, "Hey, Tim's going into the army."
Yeah. After
Oh,
9/11,
wow.
according to what I read, he
Yeah.
he was. I don't know if he'd finished the academy yet or not, but he enlisted in the army and then went SF. And
Yeah. So anyway, so real tiny law enforcement community is
Wow.
hilarious, and especially B&E, which is a small agency anyway. So that's
Yeah.
cool that you worked with a lot of the LA B&E crew and the LA Impact guys.
Yeah.
That's a cool team. And sadly, our mutual acquaintance Bill Garvey passed away. He was our task force commander when he was killed in the line of duty, driving home for an operation. So drive safely, boys and girls.
Yeah.
I'm just curious. Do you know anybody from LAPD?
Yes, I do.
I'm sure at LAB&E you probably know a ton of guys from LAPD.
Well, and I actually worked very closely with Major Crimes Division, the Counterterrorism Section of Major Crimes Division. I worked with detectives on the Joint Terrorism Task Force from LAPD. They're awesome guys. I worked with the sheriff's guys too, but primarily did a lot of work with LAPD. We would put together target packages on crooks because our mission was to develop intelligence on terrorism-related subjects. And then we would pass that target package on to the door kickers, and we passed a lot of stuff on to the criminal team over at Major Crimes Division. Awesome guys, great detectives. Man, they're just great guys. In fact, one of the guys I used to work with in LA now lives out here in North Carolina.
If we get any further down this rabbit hole, there is a genuine possibility that you will know my father.
Oh, really?
Yes. So my father taught at CSTI after leaving LAPD.
Okay.
So he taught emergency management, emergency preparedness, terrorism, all that stuff for CSTI. And through my father, I ended up he was do you know Tom McDonald?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And Paul Miller.
Paul Miller. No.
Paul Miller was a terrorism guy, but he was LAPD terrorism guy, and my dad was Paul's supervisor at LAPD before he retired. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
And then when my dad retired from LAPD, he went up to CSTI to teach emergency management, terrorism, ICS, all that kind of stuff.
And did your dad work in major crimes, or did he work
No.
in what the hell did they call it? Not PDID. Anyway,
LRPU, the Long Range Planning Unit.
No,
he basically ran the EOC and then taught.
Okay.
And then taught at CSTI. So if there was an incident, no matter what it was, whether it was terrorism related or whether it was earthquake related, he was going to be running the operations of the.
We did so much training at CSTI. I can't even tell you.
Yeah.
And I used to go to that steak place on Pacific Coast Highway in
Jocko's.
It's
or McClintock's.
McClintock's. I used to go to McClintock's, almost like it was a pilgrimage. It had to be done every time I was in that area. I had to go there.
Okay, so do you know Rob Gandy?
Or
Tony Lucan?
I know Tony Lucan. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, my dad and Tony are buddies, and Tony Lucan came on to teach there, and my dad would do blocks of instruction for Tony.
I am sure I have met your father.
Yeah, I would be willing to bet.
I spent so much time in training classes and all kinds of stuff at CSTI that I have no doubt about it. And Thursday afternoons, the farmers market was always fun too.
Oh yeah. So this is what a small world law enforcement is, boys and girls. I worked on a state task force with a supervisor that knew Gary, and Gary would go to classes where my old man was an instructor. So now Gary's in North Carolina or South Carolina. North Carolina, and I am in Idaho, and Chuck is in LA, and we all know the same people, which is pretty hilarious.
And I used to have a cabin until 2021 in Sandpoint, Idaho.
Oh, geez. Should have held on to it. It'd be worth 10 times that.
Oh, I know. But you know what? When we moved out here, it was too hard to get to. From LA, it was too hard. It was like a 7-hour trip. And then I'd fly into Spokane. And then it was another 2 hours, driving into Sandpoint and then up to
Sandpoint's. I got a buddy that was on the task force. Bill Garvey was his supervisor. He is retired in Sandpoint. So just small world.
I know.
Well, so what is this story about your dad? Because your dad worked for LA County Sheriff, and I know the details a little bit from the email, back and forth with Chuck, but I can't wait to hear it firsthand, because this is apparently it's a story that I know, but apparently you've got some new information on it, or some different information on it.
So basically 1979, this incident occurs in Marina Del Rey. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Marina Del Rey, but it happened right next to what's now the Cheesecake Factory. Back then it was Chuck's Steakhouse.
Okay.
And the official story goes that my father was writing a parking ticket, and an individual by the name of Stuart Schwebel, may he rot in hell, basically is approaching my father holding a buck knife in his hand, a folding hunter knife, which is like a 3.5 inch blade knife. And the story is that my father really doesn't recognize the threat at first, and then he does recognize the threat, and he starts backpedaling, and he's pulling his weapon out, and he's having trouble pulling his weapon out. He's struggling. He had a Bianchi break front holster that I had bought him.
Oh, geez.
And the crook breaks into a run. My father fires a shot at like 15 feet, supposedly, hits the guy in the left hip, and the guy jumps on him, stabs him in the solar plexus, and then cuts his right carotid artery and does some other bad stuff. And then a couple of sheriff's deputies respond and engage him at a place that used to be the Yankee Peddler, but now it's like Jamaica Bay Hotel. And there was initial engagement there. They saw he had my dad's gun. They saw he had a police officer's gun in his waistband. It had Packmeyer grips. It was a Model 15 Smith. And this guy had emptied the gun already. He'd taken the shells out of the gun, the 5 live and 1 spent. And the round my dad's round impacted him in the hip. One part of it lodged in the hip. The other one exited out the front. And so basically, they killed the guy where the Marriott is. That was a vacant lot where the Marriott is now. That's where the final shooting occurred. Okay. So I'm in the 3rd week of the academy, and I get the call to come to Marina Mercy Hospital, and I'm greeted by an LAPD beach officer who tells me that my father is gone and all this stuff. And, of course it's awful. And so they investigate the thing, and they try to put it together, and they come up with a video that kind of, sort of, in very general terms, describes what happened.
Like a reenactment.
Yeah, it was one of those LA County Sheriff's reenactment things that the Training Bureau does. Okay, now.
Okay, yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, at the time, the LA County Harbor Patrol, they trained at the Sheriff's Academy, but they were not deputies. They are now. They've got absorbed by the Sheriff's Department. They were all deputies. But back then, they were a separate law enforcement agency in LA County. So naturally, I'm in this business, and I'm trying to reconcile all of this in my head. And I'm thinking, well, if that had been me, my reflexes, I'm younger, my hearing's better, I would have responded quicker. I'd been more familiar with my equipment because I used to qualify at the range, and they didn't shoot from the holster back then. They just did point shooting,
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. At the Sheriff's Academy, that's what we did. We did point shooting. It wasn't until we went to like a tactical range that we did any kind of, from the holster.
Wow.
And so anyway, and he wasn't wearing a vest. and he was armed with a 38 special, and this was in the midst of the Eula Love case, which was a maelstrom.
Wow.
Yeah, my dad and I had actually talked about it that morning. I'd worked on a weekend ride along at my parent agency,
And Eula Love was a knife issue as well.
precisely, and so, and that's exactly right. And the LAPD officers were investigating a ADW, assault with a deadly weapon, on a gas company employee who was turning off the gas at her place because she hadn't paid her bill.
Yeah, she hit him with a frying pan.
She hit him, a frying pan or a shovel, something. Anyway,
Yeah.
So it's an ADW, maybe an attempt murder if she hit him in the head.
Right.
So the LAPD officers respond. They confront her. She greets him at the door with a 12-inch butcher knife, and she throws it at him, and they light her up and they kill her. And of course, there's a hue and cry, why are they, collecting on a gas bill and all this other stuff? Okay.
They smoked an elderly black woman for not paying her gas bill was the narrative.
Exactly, yes. And so my father and I talked about that. So in my mind, I thought Dad was also thinking about the Eula Love case.
Yeah.
And
it's like what's going on right now in this generation of policing.
Well, yeah, exactly. I mean, anyway, that's a whole other multitude of shows about that.
Right.
But because we all know what those officers are feeling, and we know, the risks involved every time you make a traffic stop or anything else. But anyway, getting back to the story. So for the next 40 something years, I have this vision of how this went down in my head, and I think about it all the time. And and then about 4 or 5 years ago, the LA County Memorial page on Facebook, no, I'm sorry, the Officer Down page,
ODMP,
ODMP, which is linked in my on my website. And it said it has a thing about my father. Well, this lady posted something on it saying I was there, I saw it happen, and blah 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 blah, but nobody ever interviewed me. So a sheriff's lieutenant who was involved with the LA County Peace Officers Memorial thing, doing investigations on that stuff, contacted her, got a statement, and said, wow, this is kind of different. And I read the statement, but I never talked to her. And I finally talked to her a few days ago. And what she had to tell me completely changed the way I perceived how this happened. And I came to a realization of two things. Number one, my dad saved that woman's life. She said he had saved her life, but I wasn't sure because I was under this impression that a whole other set of circumstances happened. So basically, what she says is she had just moved to LA from Connecticut to attend college. And she was helping out some friends teaching windsurfing at the baby beach there in the marina. And she'd gone back to the equipment van to get some gloves. And as she's doing that, she looks up and she sees these three guys standing in the parking lot. They're about 50 feet away from her. And one guy turns around and looks straight at her, and he's holding a knife in his hand. And he says, I know how to use this. He yells it at her. I know how to use this. And she's like, holy crap. She's 18 years old. She's brand new here. She's a babe in the woods. And so it's like, okay, I got to get help. So she starts to walk away, reposition herself away from there. And my father pulls up at that moment, and the guy starts advancing. Okay. He says that he's advancing as I am moving away. He's advancing towards me. And coincidentally, my father stops where she is where she's positioning herself. She says something to him, warning him that this guy is coming, but she said he already had recognized it. And it was a 3-wheel motorcycle, which is like an ATV. Those things are hard to get off of, they're clumsy. So my father, who's like 51 years old, he'd done 20 years in the Coast Guard. He was an engineman. And so his hearing wasn't great. And the engine was running in the car, or on the bike. So he probably didn't hear a lot of warnings, but he recognized something was wrong. He sees the guy approaching with the knife. So he he starts to dismount the bike on the right-hand side. And at the same time, he's pulling his weapon out and he loses his balance and kind of stumbles a little bit. Now the guy goes around the front of the motorcycle and my dad is backpedaling around the front of the motorcycle. Now the guy at this point is literally, when my dad is getting off the bike, the guy is like 10, 12 feet away. Now we all know that's well within the danger zone.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
You are in trouble at 12 feet. You are in big trouble. You're going to get caught.
Very.
So my dad is backpedaling. He never wrote a ticket. She said he never wrote a ticket. That wasn't happening. So he gets off the bike. He's backpedaling, and as he's backpedaling, the guy's approaching him in a very deliberate, way. He's coming at him. It's not running, but he's coming at him very deliberately, and he's screaming at him and stuff like that. And my dad raises his gun, and she says that he's pointing at him at his chest. At first she says, I'm not sure if he was thinking if he's going to shoot him or not, or that he didn't want to shoot him. And then my dad, as he's backpedaling at about 8-9 feet, he trips on his heels of his boots and falls backwards. The guy lunges on top of him, drives the knife into his chest, and then, does everything else. She said the gun discharged. Literally, the guy was no more than 3-4 feet away when the gun discharged. She said, I saw it. I watched it happen. So afterwards, she's there. She approaches a uniform. I think it was a uniform. The way she described it, it sounded to me like it was a uniform. And she says, hey, I saw this whole thing happen. And the uniform guy says, you know what? We know what happened. That's okay. Thank you very much. Carry on. See you later. Bye.
Wow.
Yeah. And she says, Gary, she says, I was so traumatized by that incident. She says, I've been carrying this with me for 40 something years. And I have not talked about it with anybody that much. I think her brother was in law enforcement back east. So I'm sure she talked about it with her brother and stuff like that. But and she had seen, when she came to California, she was interviewed by the sheriff's department, and they showed her that video. And she said, the positioning of everything is wrong. The vehicle there was a Ryder rental truck that was parked there. And my dad's motorcycle. And she said the positioning was completely wrong. All of that was wrong.
Right.
And the way she described how this happened was, I was pretty overcome with emotion there for a minute, I have to tell you.
Understandably, yeah.
But I was also like thunderstruck. My jaw dropped, because all this time I had thought my father was a victim of all those things that they teach you at CSTI.
Right.
Know your equipment, wear a vest, stay in shape, be aware, situational awareness, all that stuff. But the fact of the matter is, he saved that girl's life because, he was responding to what she was saying and recognizing the threat at the same time. And he did not have a chance. He simply did not have a chance. It was almost as bad as if he had been in a patrol car and somebody walked up to the car and blasted him.
Right.
It was just almost that bad.
It's very probably very vindicating for you to know your dad did it right. That's the moment you're like, yeah, it was. Sometimes this job, we all know this job is dangerous, and we all accept the risk.
Right.
And it goes with the territory. So to find out he did it right, and it was just, that was the way the dice rolled that day, is probably a lot more comforting than what you've thought for 40 plus years.
Well, to be very honest with you, I blame myself for buying that holster for him. He used to have just, a plain old swivel, open top with a strap, holster that everybody carried.
The old Tex Shoemaker.
Exactly. LA County, Tex Shoemaker. And I was like, I think I was an explorer at the time, and I bought him a Bianchi brake front and a speedy loader pouch with 2 speed loaders.
Right.
to bring him into the 20th century
Come on, Dad.
versus the 2 dump pouches that he had,
Right.
And so, yeah, I mean, I've kind of been torturing myself over that for a long time, and and all these other things. But now I realize that this story is just completely different. And I always thought, I always held my father up on a pedestal and considered him a hero. But now I know without a shadow of doubt he saved that girl's life.
Yeah.
And that to me is like, it's so huge, so huge.
What did this was your 3rd week in the academy when all this played out.
Yep.
How did that shape your career going forward?
Funny you should mention that. Well,
because that was a tough traumatic experience that you experienced very young and early on.
Exactly. And I took a week off. The Sheriff's Department, Academy, and LAPD, and a bunch of agencies, Highway Patrol, everybody came to the funeral and all of that, police funeral and everything. And then I wanted to know as much as I could possibly know about it. The next morning, believe it or not, and I'm sure you guys could relate to this, I think, I actually went to the crime scene. I drove to the crime scene in Marina Del Rey because we lived in Culver City, which was just a few miles away. Mm-hmm. And I went and looked at the crime scene, and saw the life-saving equipment that the bandages and the syringe caps and all that crap that they use. And then as soon as I could get the report, I devoured the reports and read the reports, and because I wanted to know what happened. So when I graduated, I finished the class. I'll tell you one thing they did. My first day back in the academy, we were having a vehicle code lecture, and you know how boring that can be, right? Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden, in the middle of the lecture, they stop and they say, "Okay, we're going to show a movie, or show a video, or whatever it was." And so they do that, and it's the CHP Newhall shooting reenactment video, which we had seen 500 times already.
Yeah.
And there is no doubt in my mind that they did that deliberately to see if I could hold it together, if I was going to hang. And I did, I mean, obviously it wasn't a pretty picture, but I was okay. Cause I had to, I wasn't going to quit. Right, I worked too hard to get there. I was not going to quit because of this. I was determined.
And your dad wouldn't want you to?
No, he would not have wanted me to. He was so happy when I took my, the 3rd week of the academy, you have your first PT test, and I passed it. And he was so happy. I'll never forget, he had tears in his eyes that Friday afternoon when I met him out on the street and told him that I just passed the test, and, and I'm good to go. He was like, he had tears in his eyes. And then of course I saw him Sunday morning, and that was it. But when I was in training, we had, a 3-month training process with 3 different FTOs. I had 2 5150s, 2 Crazos with knives while I was doing that. Now, that didn't happen a lot in Manhattan Beach. So I don't know what was going on, but for some reason on my watch, while I was riding with an FTO, we had 2, 5150s armed with knives. And the second one was really scary. The first one, we were able to subdue him, and it worked out okay. But the second one is the one that's etched in my memory because my FTO is an awesome guy. The suspect was a young male. He was naked. He was standing out on the porch of his house, and he's screaming at the top of his lungs, but had a big ass butcher knife in his hand, and he was terrorizing his family. His mother was crying and screaming. His father was crying. It was just a mess. And wow. We were on the side of the house next to a hedge. We were the closest people to him. We were hiding behind a hedge. And I had my 45, which is one of the things I decided I was going to do as soon as I could, was carry a 45 and not a 38. So that was one of the things I did. And obviously I wore a vest all the time too. But so.
Which for the era was not exactly common.
No, it wasn't common. And the vests we were issued were junk. They were
dog shit, I'll bet. Yeah.
They were so thick. Morgan Magnum, and they were like 2 inches thick. It was like unbelievable. Anyway, so I went and bought my own. But so I can still picture in my mind's eye when I close my eyes. I can still see my pistol in my hand and the sights and everything, and see the crook standing there looking at us and screaming and yelling. And I can hear my FTO saying, Gary, and he's holding his streamlight in his hand. And he says, Gary, flashlight. And he says, Gary, he says, I got this and I got my stick. And if that doesn't work, you shoot him. And I'm like, oh crap. This is really, really real. I mean,
yeah,
really real. And, it resolved itself. Everything was fine. We took him to Harbor General Hospital and got him evaluated and 5150 commitment, all that stuff. But that was a white knuckler. That was really a white knuckler because, we did not have tasers or beanbag rounds, or we didn't even have chemical sprays. We had a gun and a baton and a flashlight, which is really not an authorized impact weapon, but it was. And some guys had SAP gloves or SAPs, but I'll never forget the first time I ever saw. I'd lateraled to. I spent a couple years at Manhattan Beach, and lateraled over to Beverly Hills PD. And my first night on patrol was on morning watch. And I'm riding with an awesome guy, Kevin, and we used to call him Burn Bomb. And that guy had a nose for crooks that was just unbelievable. He was like a bloodhound. He could find a crook anywhere.
Yeah, some guys are just like that.
They just are. And so we're up cruising around, and we get a call that there was a 417, brandishing a firearm, a suspect that was up on Sunset, and he was southbound on La Cienega. And we happened to be on La Cienega, and the guy blasts past us. So we're like, okay, here we go. And I'm the bookman. I'm riding on the passenger side, and Kevin's the driver. And so, we LAPD unit comes in behind us, and we light the vehicle up, and we do a felony stop on him. And this LAPD sergeant comes up to on my right-hand side as I'm, I've got my 45 on him and everything, and he's screaming and yelling like a crazy man, the suspect is. And the LAPD sergeant says, I have a taser. And I'm like, okay.
What the hell is a taser?
And then I see
it was that big one, huh?
Yeah.
It
was
the old air taser.
Plastic.
Yep.
Yeah.
Looked like a big square-headed flashlight.
Yeah, like a weird flashlight.
That's right.
Yeah. And I see it in his hand, and I'm like going, okay, well, all right, great. And the suspect is approaching, and he's disregarding our commands. And all of a sudden I hear this pop, pop. And I went, holy shit. And I swear to you, this is true. I said to myself, my God, I'd always heard that LAPD had really crappy ammo, but man, that sounds like a cap gun. That was really crappy, because they used to carry 158 grain soft lead ammo back in the day, round nose soft lead ammo.
Yeah.
And I thought, wow, man, that is really crappy. But the guy drops, and I'm thinking, holy shit, he shot him. Holy crap. And then the guy starts rolling around, and I realize he's been tasered, because I see these copper filaments, right?
Right.
He gets up. He's got one dart in his groin, and one I think is in his chest, high on his chest. And we hear this high-pitched humming sound, this sound, okay? And he's got blood coming out of one ear. Well, what happened was, and he yanks the barbed thing, the dart, out of his groin, and there's a hunk of meat on it.
Oh.
Ooh.
Yummy.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, took the tip.
That really.
Just the tip.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Exactly. Oh, my God. And what happened was the electric impulse of the taser caused the hearing aids in his ears to overload.
Oh,
wow.
One blew out of his ear, and that was a trickle of blood, and the other one overloaded and it was humming.
Oh, Jesus.
Blew up his hearing aids.
That was crazy. So that was my first night at Beverly Hills. Yeah, that was crazy.
Wow, your first
My old
night
man.
at Beverly Hills.
That was fun. I
always
had a
tell
great
people-
time at Beverly Hills. Awesome police department. I did a lot of work with them after I left.
Yeah, they were a great police department. They were one of the first police departments. So if you have an LAPD style badge and you like the way it looks, you can thank Beverly Hills PD for being the first to take on the Los Angeles Police Department. Because back in the day, LAPD had this beautiful badge that everybody saw in 1 Adam 12, and they told anybody, you copy our badge design and we'll sue you.
Yeah.
And Beverly Hills PD, there was a captain, I think, that left LAPD and went to work as the chief of Beverly Hills PD. And he said, you know what? Sue me. And he changed the Beverly Hills PD badge to look just like LAPD's, only it was the Beverly Hills City Hall. And LAPD didn't do shit. And everybody else went, oh, and then a lot of California agencies changed their badges after that.
Yeah,
so
Pasadena, a bunch of different places did.
Yep, that's the story of how that badge became the California standard.
Yeah, and and I remember very clearly, when I would run up with some LAPD patrol guys, and they look at my badge and go, "What the hell, man? You guys stole our badge." And I say, "No, you stole our badge." It's like, what are you gonna say? Yeah, right. You're right. You got me on that.
Yeah, it's cool. So what?
Yeah, it's a great looking badge.
Yeah,
it's a great looking badge. It's on my cover of my book.
Yeah, it's
it looks good.
It is probably one of the, with the exception of the NYPD Detective Shield.
Yeah,
it is probably the most recognizable badge in law enforcement.
Yeah.
I think LAPD probably should have stuck with their original badge, though, to be quite honest, because that's not the original badge.
Well, they had like 5 other badges before it, but I think that is the best looking badge in law enforcement. I'm biased. I grew up watching Adam 12. I grew up watching my dad go to work every day wearing it. But that is the absolute coolest looking badge in law enforcement.
Yep. I remember
back in the day when they first started, though, they had this weird star badge with the rounded corners.
The circle with the weird rounded.
It looked
like a flower.
It looks so
terrible.
Cool.
Oh, I hate it.
I like it. I hate it.
But my dad, you were talking about when you were working at Beverly Hills PD, and I had started to say, but I always joke around with people that when my dad came on the job, he had a baton, a pair of handcuffs, a gun, and some extra mags, or some extra speed loaders, and a call box key.
A game ball key.
Yeah, the only radio that he had was in his car. He didn't get a radio for his belt until probably 12 years into his career.
Yeah.
And he got maced before he got a radio belt. Like it was
back in the day. They pull up on the street and turn the radio over to the PA, and that's how they could hear the radio was the PA. I know that was a completely different world than now, completely different world,
One Adam 12, respond to the corner of walk and don't walk for an unknown trouble. See the man. That was all you got.
Yeah. Exactly.
There's a person standing on this street corner. We don't know what's wrong, but they need a cop. Go.
Yeah. And, it's so funny when you watch Adam 12 now, you go, oh my God, wow, this is such fantasy land stuff. But boy, do they look good. It could be a training. It could be a training thing for how you're supposed to look, sure.
But it's for the time, it was super realistic.
Oh yeah.
It's just how far things have changed, And you think about things like the SLA shootout and the Black Panther shootout. You think about North Hollywood, and you think about Newhall, and you think about all these different events that have shaped modern law enforcement. And people always, you always see, well, when did cops, and they show a picture of 1 Adam 12 turn into this, and then they show a picture of SWAT teams and Bearcats. And then the response I've seen is, when did this? And they show the guys with the masks and the striped shirts turn into this. And they show the guys from North Hollywood. You got to keep up with the times.
Exactly. Yeah. You have to. And if you don't, you're doomed. Right. And, that is, and you have to train. I mean, that is one thing that was a bit shocking to me. I work a lot with law enforcement out here, and these poor guys, they qualify maybe a couple times a year.
Yeah, and they do the bare minimum. Wow. They shoot 100 rounds, and they have to get a certain score, and then they're done. There's no training. Yeah, it's just, can you still shoot?
And that is such a false economy, because we all know the consequence of error is catastrophic for the officer, for the victim, and for the city or the employing agency, because the lawsuits are terrible and the bad press and everything else. And nowadays, Antifa is waiting every day for another one so they can jump on that one. And
Oh, what are you talking about, Gary? Antifa's a figment of your imagination. Just ask the federal government.
Yeah, except except you got terrorist acts in Atlanta that they were responsible for. And I was cracking up when I saw the Southern Poverty Law Center attorney is one of the guys that got rolled up behind that. That doesn't surprise me at all.
They used to be a serious organization, and like everything else, they eventually just turned corrupt. But
Totally
you mentioned the LAPD badge on the cover of your book,
yes.
But you are in fact a published author, and you have written a book. So tell us how you ended up going. You're not the first author we've had on here, but I'm always curious as to how you go from gumshoe, flatfoot, narc detective, terrorism guy to I wrote a book.
Exactly. Well, there I was. No, basically, I'd done some writing before. I had a script optioned by a production company, a murder mystery script optioned by a production company a few years prior to that. Then I deployed to Iraq as a civilian embedded advisor. And while I was there, there were tragically, there were suicides on base. There was like 2 or 3 suicides on base. And there was also there was like an attempt fragging of an officer at another forward operating base. And so I got to thinking about what if a guy such as myself, who is a retired detective, my hero in this book is a retired LAPD Lieutenant 2, worked major crimes and counterterrorism and all that stuff. And he deploys to Iraq. But anyway, getting back to the story. So basically, the story starts out as a murder mystery where this guy is asked to kind of help out because he's an experienced homicide detective, asked to help out with these homicides on the base, which did happen. And so I came home and I started penciling it out, and I went, you know what? I'm a terrorism guy. I'm not really an Agatha Christie guy. So I'm going to turn this into a terrorism story. So I started writing, and I, cranked out the first draft. It took me a long time, and embarrassingly long.
Right.
And then I got an agent, and that was hard. Really, really great guy, great agent in LA. And we'd gone through some more polishes of the book, and he was going to go out with the book. His brother was a major general in Iraq with the Army, and was there when I was there in 2008, which was kind of ironic. But the really ironic thing is my character in my book, coincidentally, has a brother named Mikey, and who is in the Army and is a general in Iraq. And so that was just like a total happenstance. I had no idea about any of this. The story had long been written. So anyway, I got the book done and everything, and he was going to go out with it, and then he passed away. And so then we moved to Charlotte, and so I lost some time. It took some time to find another agent. Then I find another publisher and everything. The story, Outside the Wire, is inspired by my experiences in Iraq as an embedded counterterrorism advisor with a counter improvised explosive device defeat cell in Camp Victory, Baghdad, Iraq. And it's the story of this retired LAPD detective lieutenant who is over there doing a similar job to me, and who's never been in the service, and is thrust into this war, this war zone and this military world, which is weird. For instance, one of the things we were forbidden to carry loaded weapons. I had an M9 Beretta, which I disdained. I hated it, and and it was loaded with ball ammo. But you could not carry a loaded weapon on the base. Right. You had to carry magazines, and you had to carry a gun with the safety on and an empty mag well. And
what?
Yeah. Really dumb. This is why you would hear about these stories about local, Iraqi army or Iraqi police or Afghani army or Afghani police, shooting up a base and killing a bunch of guys. Well, everybody's got an empty damn gun.
Right, yeah.
The MPs have live ammo, or the soft guys who basically, the special operations guys who basically go, whatever, I'm loading my gun. But everybody else is empty, all the Joes, everybody's got an empty gun. So it's crazy because everybody's running. I mean, you see people walking around with saws and, M16s and, M9s and all this stuff, but they're all empty. So that was one of the things that just made me crazy. And of course, the bureaucracy and political correctness and all that other stuff. So that was part of this story that I wove into this story was this LAPD detective who's used to getting things done now is in a situation where he has to play the Army way and can't do the things that he would normally do and gets frustrated and all that stuff. So basically, the story begins with a mortar attack on the base. And he's slightly wounded. And so he meets this Army doctor. They become friends and they start spending time together. And she tells, and there was another person that was killed during the mortar attack who's an interpreter. And it turns out, as the investigation goes, it turns out he's a murder victim. So she can.
So he's basically having to conduct a murder investigation.
He is conducting a murder investigation off the books.
All right.
And
that's pretty good.
And as he's doing this, lo and behold, he discovers that there was another murder of another informant, local indigenous informant, and on base that nobody was talking about because it was a group that was classified and nobody can talk about it. Nobody knew they were there and all this other stuff, which is typical.
Right.
And so he starts following and running this stuff down, and he starts unraveling a major terrorist plot that ends up being a plot on a massive scale hatched in Tehran, involving the players involved are turncoats on base, bad guys on base who are working, as because there's a ton of local Iraqis working on the base, selling stuff and cutting hair and doing all this stuff. And also IRGC, Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps, Quds Force operatives. And, it involves weapons of mass destruction, targeting a multinational meeting in Baghdad. So, and
the book is called Outside the Wire.
It's called Outside the Wire.
And where can you get it?
You can get it at Barnes and Noble, online at Barnes and Noble, and at
Amazon.
At Amazon, of course. It is an amalgam of a war story, a detective story, and a love story. It's all three elements.
I was gonna ask, is there a love interest?
There is. The doctor. The doctor's a love interest. She's
well, don't give away the whole book, otherwise they won't buy it.
I know. She's a pretty strong character.
Now, Gary, this book, you've been speaking about this book, and this book is basically based on your time in Iraq as a civilian. We didn't really get into too much about it. I think we would love to have you back.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back
to dive into that Iraqi OIF deployment that you did as a civilian. I think that'd be really cool. I think you probably have some pretty good stories, and it's probably safe to say that,
especially from a different perspective.
Yeah,
and this deployment probably had a lot to do with your father, who had served 20 years in the Coast Guard, and now you have the chance to go overseas and fulfill that and kind of honor his legacy as law enforcement, and now as military, even though it's civilian, but you're still over there with the boys, and
it's all full circle.
Exactly. And that actually is very, very true. I grew up around the military. I was I had one of those brat cards that you get when you're a dependent, a military dependent. And we used to go to the Navy base in Long Beach when there was a Navy base. And so I grew up around the Navy, and we'd go to the Air Force bases and stuff like that. So I grew up around the service, and I was predisposed to appreciate what they do. And that was one of the things that I really wanted to showcase in this book, and I think I've done it, is the quality of the young men and women in uniform is really astounding. They are really really
Yeah.
wonderful young people, and they put it on the line, and they endure such hardships. I mean, they just really do. They just suck it up and keep
the
going.
boots on
They
the ground.
embrace the suck, as they say.
Yeah.
And
Right.
and they're awesome. And the women are a lot of the women I met. In fact, all the characters in my book, the female characters in my book, are badass, because all the women I met, for the most part, were badass. They were not, just, they were absolutely tough and smart and motivated, just like the men. It was and they had every, all the strength and ability that they could muster, and they needed to be showcased. And so that's what I did with the book. So
Well, that's awesome. Well, Gary, as you know, we like to dedicate every episode to a fallen brother or sister, and we always give our guests the opportunity. And my understanding is you have somebody you would like to dedicate this episode to. Of course,
I would like to dedicate this episode to my father, Harold L. Edgington, LA County Harbor Patrol. His end of watch is September 30th, 1979, in Marina del Rey, California.
Well, rest easy, brother. We've got it from here. And I can't. Growing up with a dad who was a cop, I still get a little, like, I don't like to hear Amazing Grace on the bagpipes, even though I love Amazing Grace on the bagpipes.
I'm a bagpipe guy, big time.
Yep. And when I see police funerals, it still stirs up those emotions from being a kid of worrying about having to go to my own father's. So I can only imagine from what my fears were to what you went through. So we're very happy to honor your father's dedication and sacrifice with this episode. Well,
thank you so much. And I am so pleased to have had this opportunity and to talk about this and share this with you and your audience. I mean, it's a remarkable thing that this young lady had witnessed and then, shared with me.
Yeah, to find out about it later. Yeah.
It's a game changer.
And then we got to get you to promise you'll come back and tell us some of those stories about your civilian deployments, because that's going to be.
I'm mostly retired, soon to be absolutely 110% retired. So
perfect.
I am at your disposal. I assure you.
We would love to hear about your civilian deployment and all your time spent with the DOJ and terrorism liaison and all that stuff.
I'm going to have to bleep out a bunch of last names that we talked about at the beginning, but it was worth it.
I know. But, it's so sad B&E's gone, because it was such a good agency. It was such a world-class agency, and it's a tragedy and a crime that they disbanded that organization.
They just needed a little bit bigger badge.
When I was working on the task force, one of the guys, and he was an INS agent, asked me if I worked for Fish and Game. I had a fishing. Wow. That was a fishing game badge.
It was a little bitty thing. The only badge I've ever seen that's smaller is the FBI badge.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty small. It's pretty small.
Maybe a Texas Ranger badge is pretty small too.
Yeah, that's a cool badge.
It is a cool badge. The history of that is what makes it cool.
Exactly.
For sure.
Exactly.
Those are some dangerous dudes.
Yeah, well, that's true.
Oh, yeah. Yes, they are.
All right, Chuck, what do you got for us?
Well, thank you all today for listening. If you like today's podcast, please go and follow us on our Instagram at war_stories_official and our Facebook at War Stories Podcast. If you already follow us, please share our posts and our info. You can also go to the link in our bio on Instagram and Facebook to reach all of our socials, our media, and our website. Our podcast is on all major podcast streaming platforms as well as on our YouTube. If you want to support us, please go to our website at www.warstoriesofficial.com and grab some gear. If you want to be featured on our show and you think you have a story and you want to share your story, please go to booking.warstories@gmail.com and send me your story and I can get you booked. We are looking for law enforcement, corrections, dispatchers, fire, medics, and veterans, as well as we're going to send an invite out to emergency service folks who work in the hospitals and the ER, such as doctors and nurses. If you have a friend who you think could be a great fit, let them know about us and give them our booking email. Again, thank you for your support and stay safe.
And Gary, I'd be remiss if we didn't have you tell people where they can follow you on social media and your website, stuff like that.
Oh yeah, here we go. My website is www.garyedgingtonauthor.com. As I said before, Outside the Wire is available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. My Instagram is, if I can read this damn thing, at Gary at G Edgington Books. And my email for the author stuff is GaryEdgingtonBooks@gmail.com. And you can find me on Facebook.
Just type it. I'm sure Gary Edgington author. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have two Facebook accounts. I have the author account, and I have another account, which is primarily where most people seem to congregate.
Yeah.
But
Right.
yeah, so, and there are links to all of that stuff on my website, and media appearances and different things. So there's a ton of stuff. There's a thing about my dad and a link to ODMP on the website. The best place to go is to www.GaryEdgingtonAuthor.com, and you can learn all about it. There's a chapter of the book, the whole thing. So there you go.
Well, Gary,
Thank
it's
you for-
wonderful to meet you. We look forward to having you back.
Love, man.
And
Yes.
Thank you.
until our next episode, come home with your shield or on it.
Roger that. Mullen Law, baby.